All right, kind of a quasi-political forum here. We only have one candidate in studio, but it's Julie Armstrong of Ward 5. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me this morning.
A little bit closer to that microphone. You're just perfect. Okay, now, you and I just had an interesting exchange. I live in Ward 5. Okay.
You do.
Dick Haynes used to be my one of my representatives. He lives literally right up the hill from me. All right. Years and years ago, back probably in the 80s, early 90s, they carved out where I live because they ran the sewer right down the backside of my property, and I hooked up to it. So I'm paying city taxes. I am a city resident, but I haven't seen you yet. So, and you told me that's because you're in the county. I said, no, I'm not. So how do we figure out who's what, which is a very good question, because in many of these wards, there are little tiny places that are dropped in and pulled out. How do we know if we're in the city?
So when you look at the ward map, and I'll go back because I could be mistaken, from Starlight Drive, St. Thomas, up Miller Creek, that is all technically county. Mm-hmm. And I'll be interested to see if you get a ballot because you're not on my list.
Well, let's put it this way. I've gotten a ballot for every city election since then.
So you might be that one little street on the backside. Mm-hmm. As you're coming off Miller Creek, it goes up one of the courts, and I can't remember the name of it. You might be the two houses that are in the city.
Here's the interesting part. St. Thomas is actually in two parts.
It is, right. You might be the two houses that are in the city.
And what Peter is not telling you.
And the rest of them are in the county.
Even if you knew Peter was in the city, you could not find his house.
That's right.
Because he lives in a bat cave at the end of a secret sidewalk. Like, I don't know what this guy's whining about. We have had, so far, my wife was there. I wasn't, so I'm not sure if it was you, but someone, at least with your campaign, went by our door. I do know that.
I'm sure it was me.
And I live in the Linda Vista area, so you've been out working
I've
at
hit
least.
2,700 houses so far.
More importantly than that, you're on Talkback, so kudos to that.
Thank you.
One of the things I really wanted to do is start talking politics, because we only get 30 minutes with you.
Can we ask her a little bit about herself, maybe?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so tell us about Julie Armstrong.
So I'm a Texas native. My husband is a Montana native, and informed me coming out of grad school down there that we would be moving as soon as possible back. He is from the east side of the state, knew he never wanted to live on that side of the state again, and so we looked at multiple places to live, and this was it. I mean, hands down, the best place we found.
Right.
I moved here. I was able to work remotely for several years for PACCAR out of Bellevue, Washington, and finally quit after 3 years and started my own business.
What is your business, if you don't mind?
So Missoula Pet Au Pair. It's right by the mall. It's a dog daycare and boarding business.
Oh, cool.
People spend a crazy amount of money on their pets here.
Yeah.
So it's something we enjoy and we've done very well at. We're trying to get #1 with the Indy poll. We've hit #2 for 2 years in a row now. So we're still trying to get that goal.
Sure.
So I've got a heavy corporate background. I've got a million degrees like everybody else in Missoula.
I don't.
Master's degrees and everything else, which makes no difference because until we get enough good paying jobs in here, you can't use them.
Right.
So
okay,
that's one of those things.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Well, let's talk about some of the big issues that have come up. And I think I teased when I talked to you some of the big four that we've had every single conversation we've had on Talkback. So let's go ahead and start with the big one, which is the Mountain Water Company. Give us your take on this acquisition, where you see it going. And I'll ask the question I've asked all the other candidates. If you're for the water acquisition, how much would be too much to spend on the acquisition? And if you're against the acquisition, now that we're already invested, would we just be throwing that money away? I guess if you could take that question, that would be great.
It's a moot question at this point. You're already into it almost $5 million. So the question of being for or against it doesn't matter now. You have to see it through because you want to win the case, so the other guy has to pay your legal fees.
Now, a lot of people have gone bankrupt in business doing this, right? I mean, just
Correct.
Because you put money on the line doesn't mean you can expect any kind of return.
There were a lot of things that happened. As soon as Carlisle bought us, they were essentially trying to sell us. That was what they're in the business of doing. And I think the city was quite aware of that, but they could not let anyone know that. Carlisle is a publicly traded company, so there are SEC regulations determining what you can say and what you can't say about those sorts of things. There are a lot of things that nobody knew was going on. It would have been fantastic if the city could have informed everyone. The more informed I think everyone is, they may have come to the same determination. They may not have, but without the information, it seems most people are against it. Just on the principle they didn't know what was going on. As I've been going around talking to people, in principle, they think it's a great idea for the city to own its own water utility. They're just unhappy with the way that it has progressed and that the way the transaction has gone through. Some of the strengths that the city is working on is that we're not the only ones suing Carlisle. Apple Valley is also suing Carlisle for the exact same reason, for the same goal. So I think that they're hoping that that case goes through because that will strengthen their case, of course. It's great to own your own water. It's gold. It's going to be the one thing you can't beg, buy, borrow, or steal in the future. So it's fantastic to own it on that premise. It could have been done differently. I think that most cities raise the bond first, ask people if they want to buy it, and I would have been preferable if it happened that way, but it didn't. So we're either in it to win it now.
Well, because it all started out in such an adversarial way. Like,
correct.
If you don't want to, we're just going to take it over. Well, no, you won't. You know. Right. So we're going to come right back. Stay with us. We have our guest in studio, and Pete is on the line. He has a question for you. We're going to come right back with more of Talkback right after this. We're back on Talkback. 721-1290 is our number. Julie Armstrong joining us here in studio. She's a candidate with Ward 5. We only have her for a half an hour, so we're going to mine as much as we can from her. Let's get Pete on the line. Pete, you're on. Go ahead.
Good morning. I thought that I just heard Julie mention that we should progress with the water company acquisition because we got $5 million into it, and that way we wouldn't have to pay the legal fees. No, state statute, unless it's changed the last week, is if you're condemning a party, you're responsible for the legal fees, win or lose that condemnation. And the argument the city's brought up is over the amount of fees, not what the statute says. So I just wanted to provide that clarification.
Okay, thanks, Pete. Appreciate it. So do you agree with that or not, Julie?
I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know, and that's something I'll go back and look up. I know that if we win, that there's a portion of those fees we do not have to pay.
I'm not a lawyer either, but my understanding is that the portion would be on some of the legal fees, but that, I mean, pretty much across the United States, when eminent domain is successful, you end up paying the person, the other party, fair market value for the eminent domain. So you're going to be paying out.
Yeah, correct. I'm just hoping that the fees go down because that's the taxpayer burden.
Sure. It's a complicated issue for sure. And that when I ask that question, how much is too much? I have rarely gotten a solid answer because it is so confusing and complicated. And frankly, I get the feeling that a lot of people don't know, and that is a little scary to me as a taxpayer in Missoula. But let's shift to another conversation that we've had on the show, and that has to do with the recently proposed gun ordinance, the background check extension here in the city of Missoula. This is one that's been a hot item for a lot of the callers on a talk show, as you can imagine. I just wanted to get your take on it. What do you think about it?
Well, and I posted this answer on my website last week. As the ordinance is written, it's not something I could support. All of us are against gun violence. That's a no-brainer. Nobody wants that to happen. But we're not New Orleans. We're not Baltimore. We're not D.C.
We're not Chicago.
And the things that have happened, such as the unfortunate incident with the producer on Brook Street last week, that rattled everybody. But when you look at the data as a whole, it's an outlier.
It happened, you mean, back in April, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So I understand. Again, council's heart is absolutely in the right place, and since the 70s, RICO has been in place, and that enacted a law telling everyone that you are responsible for knowing who you're selling a weapon to, and if you do sell to someone who is a criminal or has a bunch of different conditions, that you are culpable in any crime they may commit with that weapon. That's been in place, and the ordinance essentially is insulating you by making you perform a background check so that never happens. On the other side of the coin, you have the great amount of paranoia that a database is being built and everyone's going to know who has guns, and then they're going to tax us, and then they're going to take them away. This actually has nothing to do with Second Amendment rights at all. There is no talk of taking any guns away. They're asking people to do a background check before you transfer a weapon. That's the true meaning of the ordinance. The way that it's written now, I think it would be very difficult to enforce. I think it would end up dividing the city, and of course, the easier answer is it'd be fantastic if it just came down from the state and was not enacted on a municipal level. So,
along these lines, one of the things people have an issue with, even if it's a new law, okay, que sera, sera, but why does the guy, and this is my situation, I live on the fringe of your district. The guy across the street from me, or the family across the street from me, is not in the ward, is not in Ward 5. And in fact, they're not even in Missoula, they're in the county. So, why do you get to live by such different rules than I do? And we're just 30 feet away.
And that's what I believe. It's going to be very difficult to enforce. I think it's going to polarize the city. And
now, let me ask you
that's
this.
difficult.
If a legislator came up with a state law, statute that is identical to the Missoula ordinance and wanted to enforce it statewide, is that something that you would support?
Well, if it's statewide, we obviously have to abide by that, as we do by all federal laws.
I know that, but as a city councilor, should you win, if someone were to come to you and say, "Hey, Julie, I'm going to be submitting this law. Can I add you on as a supporter?" Someone who would speak in favor of it, say at a hearing.
Well, quite honestly, I think you have to bring people along gently. It would be something. If I was doing it, I would probably make it voluntary for 2 to 3 years. I would love to have someone who is a paid person, maybe down at the police station, that you could walk in just like you register your car, that you could bring the license for the person, an affidavit saying that they're wanting to buy the weapon, have them make it a voluntary process for a few years, gather the data, see if the data supports the ordinance, see if it actually reduces crime, then go back to the people and say, this actually works, this is why we should do it.
So we have some numbers here, right? Some quantifiable numbers.
Some data.
Okay.
One of the other big issues that's come up every time is the issue of affordable housing in Missoula. It's expensive out there.
Yes.
And I wouldn't even live in your ward if it weren't by a couple acts of grace, including a foreclosure, which is someone else's shortfall, right? So when it comes to Missoula and housing and getting people to live here that might not make that much money, as you mentioned, even with a degree, and we're both in this boat, it's not like you're going to get a job likely in your field. So tell me a little bit about what you think would be a solution or a way to move forward when it comes to affordable housing in Missoula.
What's worked in other towns is they incentivize developers to not build McMansions, to build affordable units. We have a real need for units between $160,000 and $205,000. There's a market for that. There are families that have income that fit those credit requirements and that can get into those homes. In addition, Homeward does a pretty good job of getting people educated on the different incentives available to them and getting them into these homes affordably. Rates are very low right now. However, the units are not there. Personally, I would love to see more units built like the Burn Street Commons. I don't think everybody who's starting out really needs a 1 acre yard. They probably don't want it either. We're all doing other things, and we're not at home mowing the yard. So I think more of these smaller master plan communities with common green areas in that price range would be fantastic.
So one of the criticisms that the city has received from some people is that they've focused too much on sustainability over affordability, and that they've driven up the price trying to make locations sustainable. What are your thoughts on that? Is that something that the city has fallen short on?
Yeah, I know who you're talking about, and I've read the article, and he loves using that as a talking point. So that is one. I don't know how that is going to play out down at the mill site, and I don't know all the specifics on that project. But that, again, is an outlier. That's one project that has come out of the blue. It's an outlier. It seems to be quite expensive, and that's not normal. That's not what normally happens. Personally, what I would love to see happen is them to take half the fairgrounds that we don't use. It's that whole parking area. If the county would sell that to the city and turn that into some affordable housing, because it's close to transportation, it's close to Midtown, it's easy, it's close to schools.
It's also some of the most valuable and expensive land in the entire western part of Montana.
It'd be fantastic if the county would work with us on that. I know they've been resisting, but the fact that it's only used several times a year and it just sits there the rest of the time of the year, I think that's something that we would love to capitalize on. There are a lot of, I'm sure if you live in my area, you notice there's a lot of areas that are pretty run down and not occupied, and I would love the developers to go in there and develop. I mean, there are these beautiful little enclaves of townhomes that pop up here and there and are pretty affordable. And I think we need to do more of those. But the builders have to have a reason. They have to be able to make a profit. There has to be some incentive from the city.
We're going to come right back. 721-1290 is our number. Julie Armstrong joining us. Wish we had the other candidate, but he wasn't able to be here. That's too bad. I'm sorry.
Asked multiple times.
Okay, all right. We're going to come right back, and if you have a question or a comment, now, she can only be with us for about another 10 minutes, so give us a call at 721-1290.
And that's not her choice. We're giving her 30 minutes to make it fair for the candidate.
We'll be right back. Hey, we're back on Talkback, and we're visiting with Julie Armstrong at Ward 5. And grab those headphones. We've got a quick call here from Marilyn. Marilyn, we're rapidly running out of time. What's your question?
I'd like to know if she can define what socialism is.
All right. So let's ask her. Can you define what socialism is? She's a very well-educated lady. Go ahead.
Well, socialism is obviously aggregating all materials and all resources to benefit the general population. That's a basic definition. It's not something that works in America. It's not democracy, and it's not something that I support. I am for labor unions, and I am for people having collective bargaining power. So that is a socialist concept, and I will say that. But did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and answer some of the questions on Facebook. And these are mostly comments, so take them as you will. Claire says, the state of Montana, quote, owns the water, and it's not for sale. The Missoula controversy is over ownership of the delivery of water. So when you talk about it being like gold and things like that, are you talking about the infrastructure or the water?
No, correct. And
you can take the headphones off.
The Constitution does state that all the people of Montana do own the water. So this is absolutely for ownership of the utility. However, owning the delivery of the water is important as well, because then you get to maintain the quality, the delivery rates, obviously how it's delivered. I mean, that's important as well.
Okay. Brian says, if the current water company bought it to sell it, why didn't the city just try to buy it in the normal process? They will have to pay fair market value, which is what the other company is going to be willing to pay when they eventually win this confiscation process. No matter what they have to pay, all the legal fees of both sides, if the value is over $50 million, the last ridiculous offer they made. I'm sorry, a little word jumble there, but I guess the question is, and you had mentioned earlier, if they could go back and do things different, you probably would. What do you think they should have done different?
That's what the lawsuit's over. The city did make an offer to buy the water. And there was an understanding between Robert Dove and John Engen that the city could buy the water, and that's exactly why the lawsuit came about, because they reneged on that. So the city did try to buy, and they have tried to buy the water before. They tried to buy it from the family that owned it prior to this.
Yeah. They tried back in the 80s through condemnation. That didn't work then.
Right.
Now, as a member of city council, one of the big questions I would have, and I think the courts are obviously deciding this, but if you had this agreement, why not have it on paper? I mean, this seems like a huge oversight to me. If I were in business and I had a guy going out and getting contracts for me for work that I was going to do, well, why didn't you get a paper contract for the lumber we just bought? It just seems like a big short sight.
Hopefully that first right of refusals, and for any utility they might choose to operate in the future now.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Now, as we're rapidly running out of time, quick note on the exotic animal ban. Is that something that you would have gone for, or do you side with the circus, or what? I mean, or do you even have an opinion?
I think it's very unfortunate that the Shriners were cut out of that conversation and that it affected them directly. I would love for them to come back to the city of Missoula with a proposal and be allowed to bring the circus back. maybe with different parameters, maybe with the animals being used as educational purposes instead of performing. I think that's, I don't support it for the fact that the Shriners lost a major source of income, and they do such good work that kind of broke my heart, actually. And they were the only ones truly affected. We don't have major animal acts coming through here
because
with exotic animals.
Excludes rodeos. Right?
Well,
yeah.
No, it doesn't exclude domestic animals. So horses are allowed, cows are allowed. That was one of the questions I had. If they're planning on bringing racehorsing back, which the county wants to bring it back to the fair, how does it affect that? Those are animals performing for money, but horses are excluded.
Elephants are domesticated.
That's in the county, though. That's in the county fairground.
I think we have a problem with linguistic terminology here. And I thought it was confusing myself. Obviously, you thought it was confusing. So confusing all around. Well, what hasn't been confusing is that you've been a very gracious guest. Thank you so much for coming on today with us, Julie.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And come see my house. You'll find out
will.
I'm in the city.
I think you're one of the two that are in the city on that street.
By the way, I am so secluded, okay, that I've lived there for, 1991, 20-some years, right? I've had one trick-or-treater.
If any house has a sign on the door that says you are within range, I don't walk down the driveway. I will tell you that.
There is a legend of the creepy old guy on St. Thomas Avenue, and that might be part of the trick-or-treat
pretty much me.
problem.
Hey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate your and for the other candidate, whoever that might be, who is
Chase.
Chase.
Yeah, Chase Callan, I think.
Where are you?
Yeah, I haven't met him yet either. I would love to.